Karen blocks ambulance with her car, says she was there first. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The day had started out like any other in the small town, with the sun filtering softly through the scattered clouds, casting a warm but gentle light over the pharmacy nestled on the busy street corner. People bustled in and out, clutching bags and prescriptions, exchanging quick hellos or hurried goodbyes as they went about their errands. The curb outside the pharmacy was a narrow strip of asphalt, marked clearly with bright yellow paint that indicated a fire lane, meant to be kept clear for emergency vehicles, but unfortunately, it wasn't uncommon to see it misused by impatient drivers desperate for a quick stop. As the afternoon stretched on, the usual flow of customers didn't slow, but what happened next was anything but usual. Karen pulled her small, silver SUV into the fire lane without a second thought, the engine's gentle hum dying down as she hit the brakes. She glanced briefly at the clock on her dashboard and muttered under her breath about how just grabbing something wouldn't take more than a minute. She was already irritated, glancing impatiently at the pharmacy door and tapping her fingers on the steering wheel. She had places to be, things to do, and this was the quickest way in and out without wasting time circling for a parking spot. To Karen, the fire lane was nothing more than an extra space conveniently left open, and she didn't see why she should be penalized for using it, especially since she planned to be quick. Across the street, the wail of an ambulance siren cut sharply through the hum of the afternoon. Karen barely registered it at first, focused on the small bag of items she needed to pick up inside the pharmacy. The siren grew louder and more insistent, a high-pitched, urgent cry that tugged at the nerves of everyone nearby. Several heads turned as the ambulance rounded the corner, blue and red lights flashing violently in the sunlight. The paramedics inside were not just there on a routine call, they were responding to a medical emergency that demanded immediate attention, a matter of life and death. The ambulance screeched to a halt right behind Karen's vehicle, which was still stubbornly occupying the fire lane. Without wasting a second, two paramedics burst out of the ambulance doors, pushing a stretcher and carrying medical equipment, their faces tight with tension. One of them strode directly toward Karen's car, the urgency in his steps unmistakable. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm but polite, "you need to move your vehicle. This is a fire lane, and we have an emergency patient here." The words hung in the air, charged with desperation and professionalism, but Karen's face hardened as if she'd been challenged rather than asked. She shook her head and responded, "I'm just grabbing something from the pharmacy. I was here first, and I won't be long." Her tone was flat but resolute, like she was stating a fact no one could dispute. The paramedic's eyes flicked anxiously toward the ambulance, where the back doors were wide open and the patient waited inside, vulnerable and helpless. "Please, ma'am. This lane is for emergencies only. We can't get through if your car is blocking us." He took a breath, trying to maintain calm. Someone's condition is critical. Every second counts. But Karen wasn't having it. She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms and shifting her weight. "I said I won't be long. This isn't the middle of nowhere. I have every right to park here for a moment. You'll just have to wait." Her voice was louder now, drawing the attention of bystanders who were beginning to gather, sensing the brewing conflict. People around the pharmacy started murmuring, their eyes darting between the paramedics and Karen's car. Some looked frustrated at the blockage, others hesitant, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. A young woman clutching a prescription bag muttered, "That lady's blocking the ambulance? Are you kidding me?" while an older man shook his head, muttering about selfishness and common decency. The paramedic took a step back but didn't leave, his stance firm as he glanced at the crowd. His partner was busy preparing equipment, urgency reflected in every movement. Karen seemed oblivious to the tension she was creating. She reached over and locked her doors, a clear sign she had no intention of moving anytime soon. "Look, I'm not moving for anyone," she said flatly. "I was here first, and I'll leave when I'm ready. Besides, this is a public street. You can't just make people move whenever you want." Her words were like a wall, cold and unmoving. The paramedic's jaw tightened, and he exchanged a quick glance with his partner, who was already on the phone, presumably calling for backup or assistance. As the siren continued to wail, drawing even more curious and concerned onlookers, the tension escalated. The paramedic finally raised his voice, hoping to break through Karen's stubbornness. "Ma'am, please understand that this is not just a simple inconvenience. Someone's life is at risk, and we can't get them to the hospital without clear access." The crowd around them began to murmur louder, some shouting in support of the emergency responders, others defending Karen's right to park wherever she pleased. A man filming the scene with his phone narrated aloud, "Can you believe this? An ambulance trying to save a life and this woman won't move." Karen glared at the growing crowd and shouted back, "It's not my problem if someone's dying. I have things to do, and I'm not about to let an emergency vehicle bully me out of a parking spot I'm already using." Her defiance was absolute, and it sent a ripple of shock and disbelief through the bystanders. Some crossed their arms, shaking their heads, others whispered that she was selfish and cruel. A few tried to reason with her, pleading, "Come on, please just move. Someone could die." The paramedics stayed calm but clearly frustrated. The ambulance's equipment beeped softly in the background as the patient lay waiting for care. One of the paramedics knelt briefly to check their radio, trying to get additional support while explaining the urgency of the situation. Despite the mounting pressure, Karen's expression remained unmoved, her eyes fixed on the pharmacy doors as if willing them to open faster. The clock was ticking, and every second felt heavier than the last. Suddenly, the ambulance driver leaned out and yelled, "Ma'am, this is a life-or-death emergency. Move your car now, or we will have to call the police to remove it." The threat broke through the din of voices for a moment, but Karen only scoffed. "Police? Go ahead. I'm not moving just because someone says so. I have rights, and I'm using this space." The words were cold and deliberate, a clear refusal that left everyone breathless with disbelief. The crowd was now fully invested, some booing Karen, others whispering furiously. The paramedics looked at each other, the frustration in their eyes undeniable, but they maintained their professionalism. They knew their role was to save lives, not to engage in battles with obstinate drivers. But the stakes were too high to back down. Someone's life depended on the space Karen was refusing to vacate. As the tension mounted, a heavy silence fell for a moment over the scene, broken only by the siren's steady, desperate wail and the murmurs of the gathered crowd. Karen sat behind the wheel, her fingers drumming impatiently, her gaze unwavering. The ambulance waited, poised to speed off the moment the fire lane was clear, but for now, it was trapped, hostage to one woman's stubborn refusal to move. And as the minutes dragged on, it became painfully clear that in this battle of wills, the stakes were no longer about convenience, they were about a life hanging in the balance. The paramedics' voices had grown more urgent, their insistence no longer just a polite request but a desperate plea, yet Karen remained immovable behind the wheel of her silver SUV, a barrier between life and death that nobody could seem to breach. The crowd around the pharmacy had thickened considerably since the ambulance's arrival, with more bystanders stopping to watch the growing confrontation. Some pulled out their phones to record, while others shouted in frustration, their emotions simmering between anger and helplessness. The atmosphere was tense and charged, as if everyone was collectively holding their breath, waiting to see whether Karen would finally relent or if the situation would escalate beyond control. One of the paramedics stepped closer, raising his voice so it could be heard above the murmurs and occasional outbursts from the crowd. "Please, ma'am, this is a medical emergency. The patient inside is in critical condition. We need to get moving immediately." His eyes were fixed on Karen's face, searching for any sign of compassion, any hint that she might understand the gravity of the moment. But Karen's expression was hard, her jaw clenched, and her eyes flashing with defiance rather than concern. "I'm not moving," she said firmly. "I told you, I have rights too. I can park here if I want. There's nothing illegal about it." Her voice was louder now, filled with a certainty that only deepened the divide between her and the paramedics. The paramedics exchanged a quick, frustrated glance. One of them lifted his radio, speaking briefly to dispatch, his words clipped and urgent, but the response came back slow. Backup or police were on their way, but every second felt like a lifetime. The man with the radio then turned back to Karen and tried to reason once more. We're not here to argue or inconvenience you. But someone's life depends on this lane being clear. Your car is blocking us from leaving with the patient, and that patient's survival depends on getting to the hospital immediately. Please reconsider. He was calm but firm, a professional on a mission, but Karen's eyes narrowed, and she shook her head as if rejecting the very idea that she should be inconvenienced for anyone else. Some people in the crowd began to shout at Karen, their voices rising in indignation. Move your car. People's lives are more important than your convenience. How can you be so heartless? These words, instead of softening Karen's stance, seemed only to harden her further. She leaned on the car door, speaking loudly so that everyone could hear her. I'm not the bad guy here. I'm just trying to do what I need to do. This is a public street, and I have the right to park here for a moment. If someone is really that sick, they should have called an ambulance earlier or found a way to get help without blocking me. Her words were bitter, defensive, and as she spoke, a few nearby people exchanged looks of disbelief. The audacity of putting her convenience over a possible life was almost staggering. The paramedics' patience was wearing thin, but they knew they had to stay professional, for the sake of the patient and the integrity of the emergency response. One of them stepped closer to Karen's window and lowered his voice slightly, hoping to break through her stubbornness with a more personal appeal. Ma'am, I'm begging you. This patient is someone's mother, father, child, or friend. We don't know who they are, but their life matters just as much as yours. Please, just move your car. We need to get this person to the hospital. He looked into her eyes, trying to find any spark of empathy, but Karen only stared back coldly, a wall of refusal. As the standoff dragged on, the crowd around them grew more vocal. Some tried to persuade Karen gently, while others lost patience and shouted insults. You're selfish. Let the ambulance through. What if it was your family? A woman nearby, tears in her eyes, pleaded, please think about the person in there. This isn't just about you. But Karen's defiance was unyielding. She turned toward the pharmacy entrance for a moment, then back at the paramedics, repeating her mantra that she was just grabbing something and would be quick. The paramedics glanced at each other, clearly concerned that the situation was spiraling. The patient's condition was critical, and every moment wasted could mean the difference between life and death. One of the paramedics, voice strained with emotion, called out again, this time louder and more desperate, someone is dying in that ambulance. If you don't move your car right now, we can't get them the care they need. Please, I'm begging you. The crowd quieted for a moment, the weight of those words sinking in, but Karen remained unmoved, her stubbornness almost surreal against the backdrop of such a dire emergency. Meanwhile, the ambulance crew was preparing inside, checking equipment, and stabilizing the patient as best they could in the cramped space. The constant noise of the siren outside mixed with the murmurs of the growing crowd, the tension thick in the air. A few people tried to comfort the paramedics, offering words of encouragement and support, but the frustration was palpable. They knew time was slipping away. As more minutes passed, the situation caught the attention of passers-by who weren't initially involved. Several people stopped to watch the drama unfold, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others filming on their phones. The spectacle had become a viral moment in the making, someone blocking an ambulance on a fire lane, refusing to move while a life hung in the balance. Social media posts began circulating even before the police arrived, with comments ranging from outrage to shock. Eventually, a man who identified himself as a store employee stepped forward, speaking calmly to Karen. Ma'am, please, we're all worried about what's happening. This lane is for emergencies only, and blocking it is dangerous. Can you please consider moving your car? The paramedics are trying to save someone's life. Karen shot him a sharp look, then folded her arms again. I don't have time for this. I'm just grabbing a quick item inside. This is ridiculous. The employee sighed, knowing he had no real authority but hoping his appeal might sway her. Around them, people whispered and argued, some ready to call the police themselves if the situation didn't resolve soon. The paramedics, feeling the pressure, began to make phone calls, explaining the obstruction and requesting immediate law enforcement assistance. They tried to keep their focus on the patient, but the clock was relentless. Suddenly, the paramedic who had been most vocal approached Karen's window one last time, his voice calm but steely with resolve. "Ma'am, if you don't move your car right now, we will have to call the police, and you could be fined or arrested for blocking emergency access. Please think about the consequences, not just for yourself, but for the person inside that ambulance." The words hung heavily in the air, signaling the seriousness of the situation beyond just frustration or inconvenience. Karen's gaze hardened, but after a long, heavy silence, a flicker of doubt seemed to cross her face. The reality of the threat, the possibility of police involvement, finally seemed to penetrate her stubborn armor. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see if this would be the turning point. Slowly, she unlocked her door and started the engine, but not without one last bitter comment about overreacting people and drama. As Karen's car finally edged forward, clearing the fire lane, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the crowd. The paramedics wasted no time, quickly pushing the stretcher into position, securing the patient, and loading them back into the ambulance. The siren blared again as the ambulance pulled away, the flashing lights cutting through the fading afternoon light. The bystanders dispersed, many shaking their heads or muttering about the selfishness they had just witnessed. The paramedics exchanged tired but grateful glances, knowing that the battle had been won, but the war for that patient's life was far from over. In the wake of the confrontation, the pharmacy employees came out to check on the scene, and conversations buzzed with disbelief, sympathy, and a renewed appreciation for the unseen heroes who put their lives on the line every day. The events of the afternoon would linger in the minds of those who witnessed them, a stark reminder of the thin line between ordinary moments and crises where every second truly matters. The tension that had gripped the curb outside the pharmacy did not dissipate immediately with Karen's reluctant decision to move her car. Instead, it transformed into a palpable standoff that hovered over the scene like a thick fog, dense with frustration and disbelief. As Karen shifted her vehicle inch by inch, the paramedics remained on high alert, knowing that every moment lost was precious and could very well determine the fate of the patient still lying vulnerable on the stretcher. The crowd, however, did not disperse as one might expect after such a dramatic incident. Instead, many lingered, their conversations a mix of condemnation, bewilderment, and heated debate over the selfishness that had just played out in public view. Some argued vehemently about personal rights and freedoms, while others insisted that in moments of crisis, community responsibility should always come first. The air was thick with emotions, and it seemed as though the standoff had become a reflection of deeper social tensions simmering beneath the surface. Karen's movements were deliberate and slow, almost as if she was punishing everyone around her for what she perceived as their intrusion on her time and space. She cast a glance at the crowd, her eyes scanning faces that ranged from angry to sorrowful, but she refused to show any sign of remorse or understanding. Instead, her voice rose again, sharp and resolute, as she addressed the paramedics and bystanders alike. "You people act like I'm some kind of villain," she said bitterly, "but I have my own problems and places to be. Just because someone's sick doesn't mean the world has to stop for them." Her words hit like a slap, and a few bystanders gasped, unable to reconcile her cold dismissal with the gravity of the emergency unfolding mere feet away. The paramedics exchanged weary glances, recognizing that reasoning with her was like trying to move a mountain with their bare hands. One of the paramedics stepped forward, his expression tightening with frustration but his tone remaining calm, as if to remind Karen, and the growing audience, that this was not a matter of personal inconvenience but a question of life and death. "Ma'am, the person in the ambulance is someone's loved one, someone's family member. They're fighting for their life right now. This is not about your schedule or your errands, it's about giving them a chance to live." He spoke with a quiet urgency that seemed to cut through the noise, but Karen was already shaking her head, unwilling to accept the reality of what she was hearing. "That may be true, but I have rights too. You can't just tell me to move whenever you feel like it." Her voice was a mix of defiance and disbelief, as if the very idea that her convenience could be overridden was an affront to her entire existence. Around them, the crowd's murmurs began to swell into louder voices, with some people openly condemning Karen's stance and others attempting to defend it on the grounds of personal freedom and frustration with societal rules. A woman standing near the pharmacy's entrance shouted, "What kind of person puts their own convenience over someone's life?" Have you no heart? Another man, his arms crossed and face stern, argued back, we all have rights. If you start telling people when and where they can park, where does it end? The debate escalated rapidly, the bystanders becoming as much a part of the drama as Karen and the paramedics themselves. The conflicting voices created a cacophony that echoed off the walls of nearby buildings, turning what should have been a straightforward emergency into a public spectacle of clashing values and emotions. As the paramedics continued their work, preparing to move the patient into the ambulance, their eyes darted frequently toward Karen, wary of any further delays or disruptions. One paramedic pulled out his radio and spoke rapidly, explaining the situation to dispatch and requesting immediate police intervention. The response came moments later, confirming that officers were en route to manage the situation and ensure the ambulance could leave without further obstruction. The paramedics' focus, however, remained firmly on the patient, as they worked quickly but carefully to stabilize and secure them for transport. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on their shoulders. They understood that every minute wasted on the curb was a minute stolen from the patient's chance to survive. Karen, however, remained in her vehicle, her arms folded tightly across her chest as if bracing herself against the world. Her expression was a complicated mixture of anger, frustration, and something deeper that few could decipher, a stubbornness born perhaps from a lifetime of feeling overlooked or powerless in other areas. Yet here, in this moment, her refusal to budge became a symbol of the kind of obstinacy that could have devastating consequences. A few passers-by approached her car, trying once more to appeal to her better nature, but each attempt was met with cold indifference or outright hostility. Please, one woman pleaded softly, just think about the person in the ambulance. You don't know who they are, but they need help. It's not about you. Karen's response was a dismissive shake of her head, followed by a terse, I'm done listening. The arrival of the police officers added a new dimension to the standoff. Two uniformed figures approached the scene with measured steps, their faces calm but authoritative. They quickly assessed the situation, the blocked fire lane, the paramedics' urgent expressions, and the growing crowd. One officer spoke quietly but firmly to Karen through her open window, explaining that blocking emergency vehicles was a serious offense and that she could face fines or other legal consequences if she did not move her vehicle immediately. The officer's presence seemed to finally pierce the bubble Karen had wrapped herself in, and after a prolonged silence, she sighed heavily, unlocking her doors and starting the engine. But even as she began to pull away, her parting words carried the same bitter edge. I hope this drama was worth it. People overreact too much. With the lane finally cleared, the ambulance sped off, its sirens blaring once more as it raced toward the hospital. The crowd dispersed slowly, conversations lingering on the events that had just unfolded, some people shaking their heads in disbelief, others murmuring about how things like this could be prevented in the future. The paramedics, still catching their breath, thanked the bystanders for their patience and support, though their faces revealed the weight of the day's ordeal. The pharmacy staff returned to their work, but the hum of quiet discussions filled the air, reflecting the unease and unresolved feelings left in the wake of Karen's refusal to yield. In the quiet aftermath, a few individuals remained near the curb, reflecting on what they had witnessed. The incident had been a stark reminder of how fragile the line between order and chaos could be when self-interest collided with communal responsibility. It was clear to everyone that the stakes in this situation were not just about parking rules or petty arguments, but about the value of empathy, the importance of rules designed to protect life, and the need for people to see beyond themselves in moments of crisis. Karen's stubbornness had tested that line, and while the emergency response ultimately succeeded in getting the patient on their way, the memory of the confrontation lingered, a powerful lesson in the cost of putting oneself before others. As the day faded into evening, the pharmacy's lights dimmed, and the streets grew quieter, the story of Karen and the ambulance spread through conversations and social media posts, sparking debates and reflections far beyond the small town where it had all unfolded. It became a cautionary tale about the importance of cooperation, compassion, and the recognition that, sometimes, the simple act of moving a car could mean the difference between life and death. And for the paramedics, the crowd, and even Karen herself, that afternoon would remain etched in memory as a moment when the fragile threads of humanity were tested and stretched to their limits. Even as the ambulance's flashing lights disappeared down the street and the crowd began to thin, the weight of what had just transpired hung heavily over the scene outside the pharmacy. The sharp clash between Karen's stubborn refusal to move her car and the urgent need of the paramedics to save a life had left a scar, not just on those who witnessed it but on the entire community that would soon learn of the incident. The murmurs of anger and disbelief slowly gave way to a profound silence, an uncomfortable stillness that settled over the sidewalk like an oppressive fog. It was as if everyone present, from the paramedics to the bystanders, carried an invisible burden, one born from the recognition that the selfishness and obstinance displayed in those critical moments could have cost someone their life. Karen herself sat in the driver's seat of her SUV, her engine idling as she stared ahead, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly draining from her system. She wasn't blind to the looks of disgust and disappointment that followed her every movement now. She could feel the judgment radiating from the people she had so defiantly faced down just moments before. Yet beneath her hardened exterior, a flicker of doubt and unease began to creep in, a small, insistent voice questioning whether her actions had truly been justified. As she sat there, the echoes of the paramedics' desperate pleas and the anguished cries from the crowd replayed in her mind, each one a reminder of the life that had been at stake. The realization that her refusal to move had placed a human being's survival in jeopardy began to gnaw at her conscience, stirring a restless guilt that was hard to shake. Meanwhile, the paramedics, now free from the physical blockade but still emotionally burdened, hurried back into the ambulance to continue their work. Inside the cramped space, the atmosphere was grim but focused, the team doing everything in their power to stabilize the patient whose life had been so nearly jeopardized by the delay. Every beep of the monitor, every administered dose of medication was a reminder of how close the call had been, and how precious the seconds lost outside had been in the broader fight for survival. The lead paramedic's hands moved with practiced precision, but his eyes betrayed the weight of responsibility he carried, not only for the patient's immediate care but for the helplessness he had felt moments ago, stuck behind a car that refused to move. Back outside, the police officers who had arrived to manage the scene now spoke quietly with Karen, explaining the legal consequences she could face for blocking an emergency vehicle and the importance of understanding the rules that exist precisely to protect lives. Their words were firm but not without compassion, emphasizing that the law was not just about punishment but about safeguarding the community. Karen listened, the reality of the situation settling in like a cold wave. For the first time, she seemed to grasp the broader implications of her actions, the ripples they had caused far beyond her own narrow perspective. The officers handed her a citation, but the gesture felt less like a reprimand and more like a somber acknowledgement of the gravity of what had transpired. As the evening wore on and the crowd dispersed entirely, local news crews began to arrive, drawn by the story's shocking nature and the growing buzz on social media. Interviews were conducted with eyewitnesses and emergency personnel, each retelling adding layers of emotion and insight to the incident. The narrative that emerged was one of frustration and disbelief, but also of heroism and community spirit in the face of needless obstruction. The paramedics were praised for their professionalism and dedication under immense pressure, while Karen's refusal to move her vehicle sparked widespread condemnation and sparked conversations about civic responsibility and empathy. The story quickly gained traction beyond the small neighborhood, becoming a symbol of the tensions that arise when individual selfishness clashes with collective need. In the days that followed, Karen found herself at the center of a social storm. Her name was shared across online platforms, her actions dissected and debated endlessly. The backlash was swift and unrelenting, with many condemning her as the embodiment of entitlement and callousness. Messages poured into her social media accounts, ranging from angry accusations to heartfelt pleas for understanding and change. Some called for legal reforms to prevent similar incidents, while others used the story as a cautionary tale about the importance of putting others before oneself in times of crisis. The pressure was immense, and Karen felt increasingly isolated as she navigated the fallout from that fateful afternoon. Yet amid the storm, a quiet transformation was beginning to take root within her. The initial defensiveness that had fueled her refusal to move gave way to reflection and remorse. She reached out privately to the paramedics involved, expressing regret for the delay and seeking to understand more about the patient and the impact her actions had caused. The paramedics, while professional and measured, acknowledged her apology with a cautious openness, recognizing that change often begins with acknowledgement and dialogue. Their exchange was a small but significant step toward healing, a reminder that even the most fraught conflicts can find resolution through empathy and communication. Karen also took steps to make amends in her community, volunteering with local organizations focused on emergency preparedness and civic education. She spoke publicly about the dangers of blocking emergency access and the importance of understanding one's role in supporting public safety. Her efforts were met with a mixture of skepticism and hope, but over time, her genuine commitment to change began to soften some of the initial anger and suspicion. The story that had once cast her as a villain slowly evolved into one of redemption and growth, illustrating the complex human capacity for error and improvement. For the paramedics, the experience remained a powerful reminder of the unpredictable challenges they face daily and of the critical importance of public cooperation in emergencies. They continued their work with renewed determination, their resolve strengthened by the knowledge that every second counts and that the community's support can mean the difference between life and death. The incident with Karen became part of their shared story, a lesson in patience, perseverance, and the fragile balance of human interactions in moments of crisis. As the weeks turned into months, the incident was woven into the fabric of local lore, a story recounted at community meetings and training sessions, a catalyst for discussions about respect, responsibility, and the social contract that binds people together in shared spaces. It sparked initiatives to improve public awareness about emergency access and to foster greater empathy among residents. In this way, the confrontation outside the pharmacy, painful and fraught as it had been, planted seeds for a stronger, more compassionate community. Looking back, it was clear that the day Karen blocked the ambulance had become a turning point, not just for the individuals directly involved but for the broader community. It exposed raw truths about human nature and the sometimes harsh consequences of putting self-interest above collective well-being. Yet it also revealed the power of accountability, the potential for growth, and the enduring hope that even the most difficult moments can lead to understanding and change. In the end, the story was not just about a car blocking a fire lane but about the complex interplay of pride, responsibility, and the capacity for compassion that defines us all.